parents who sacrifice everything for their children. And then there are parents who sacrifice their children for everything. But inside one mansion, a different business was taking place. Not the buying of railroads. Not the building of fortunes. Not the conquest of Wall Street. A daughter was becoming the product. Her name was Consuelo Vanderbilt. She was beautiful. She was intelligent. She was 17 years old. And she was in love. Just not with the man her mother had chosen. Because to Alva Vanderbilt, love was a distraction. Marriage was a transaction. And a daughter was simply another asset waiting to be invested. So she did something almost unimaginable. She locked her own child inside a room. Until the girl agreed to marry a British duke she barely knew. Not because he loved her. Not because she loved him. But because his family possessed something money couldn't buy. A title. One single word before a man's name. Duke. What happened next would become one of the most shocking family betrayals in American history. A marriage worth millions. A fortune exchanged for centuries of aristocratic prestige. A young woman's happiness traded like stock on the open market. And years later, the bride herself would reveal what really happened behind those mansion doors. A confession so heartbreaking, it forever changed how historians looked at America's richest family. Tonight, we're turning another darker page of history. By the 1880s, the Vanderbilt name had become almost mythical. Their fortune had begun with one man, Cornelius Vanderbilt, known simply as the Commodore. He built an empire from steamships, then railroads, until wealth flowed into the family faster than almost anyone could count. By the time his descendants inherited the fortune, the Vanderbilts weren't merely rich. They were unimaginably rich. They built mansions so enormous that newspapers called them cottages with open sarcasm. Every room glittered with imported marble, French tapestries, Italian sculptures, gold leaf, crystal chandeliers. Everything Europe had, America's newest billionaires simply purchased. Yet despite possessing unimaginable wealth, the Vanderbilts suffered from one painful problem. They were considered new money to ordinary Americans. That meant nothing to New York's elite. It meant everything, because there existed an invisible club, a society governed not by bank accounts, but by bloodlines, old Dutch families, colonial fortunes, generations of inherited prestige. Money could build a palace, but it couldn't erase where your grandfather came from. And standing at the gates of that exclusive world was one woman who absolutely refused to accept rejection. Her name was Alva Vanderbilt. Unlike many wealthy wives of her era, Alva wasn't content with hosting dinners. She wanted power, recognition, victory. She understood something most people didn't. Society wasn't simply about parties. It was another battlefield. And every invitation was ammunition. Every friendship, a political alliance. Every marriage, a corporate merger. The queen guarding New York's highest society was none other than Caroline Aestir. To be accepted by Mrs. Aestir meant everything. To be ignored by her was social death. For years, the Aestirs treated the Vanderbilts like outsiders. Rich, yes. Respectable, not quite. It infuriated Alva. Not because she lacked money, but because someone had dared tell her money wasn't enough. She took that as a declaration of war. If society wouldn't accept Alva Vanderbilt, she would make society come to her. Literally, she commissioned one of the grandest private homes America had ever seen. The Vanderbilt Mansion on Fifth Avenue. It wasn't merely a residence. It was a statement, a challenge, almost a threat. Imported marble covered the walls. European artisans spent years decorating its interiors. Every staircase announced wealth. Every ceiling screamed superiority. It reportedly cost millions in today's money. Not because it needed to, but because everyone had to know it could. Then came the masterstroke. The ball. Not just another party. The party. Hundreds of invitations were delivered across New York. One invitation was deliberately missing. Mrs. Caroline Aestheres. The message was unmistakable. You may ignore me, but everyone else is already inside my house. The pressure exploded across New York's elite. Mrs. Aestheres realized something dangerous. If she stayed away, she risked becoming the outsider instead. Finally, she surrendered. The invitation arrived, and Alva had won. Not with heritage, not with pedigree, but with overwhelming financial force. It was one of the greatest social victories in American history. Yet victory brought a new obsession, because after conquering New York, Alva looked across the Atlantic. Europe possessed something America could never manufacture. Centuries of noble blood, ancient castles, royal titles. The Vanderbilts had billions. The British aristocracy had prestige. One possessed money, the other possessed history, and Alva began imagining a deal that would unite both. Unfortunately, the price wasn't measured in dollars. It would be paid by her own daughter. Before she became a duchess, before newspapers called her one of the most famous brides in the world, Consuelo Vanderbilt was simply a teenage girl. She loved horseback riding. She adored books. She possessed a quiet intelligence that often disappeared beneath society's expectations. Unlike her fiercely ambitious mother, Consuelo disliked attention. She wasn't interested in social warfare. She didn't dream of crowns or castles. She dreamed of something remarkably ordinary, to marry for love. And for a brief moment, she believed she might. She fell deeply in love with Winthrop Rutherford, a handsome, well-connected young American from a respected New York family. He wasn't a duke. He wasn't a prince. He wasn't heir to an ancient European estate. But he loved her, and she loved him. By nearly every account, their affection was genuine. Friends noticed the happiness in her smile. For the first time, Consuelo imagined a future she had chosen herself. She couldn't have known. Her mother had already chosen another. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the strange relationship between America and Britain during the late 19th century. Across the Atlantic, many of Britain's oldest noble families possessed magnificent estates, magnificent titles, and terrifying financial problems. Their castles were expensive. Their lands no longer produced the wealth they once had. Some aristocratic families were, quite literally, land-rich, cash-poor. Meanwhile, across the ocean, America's industrial dynasties had accumulated fortunes unlike anything the world had ever seen. They had railroads, steel, banking empires, oil, millions upon millions of dollars. But they lacked something impossible to purchase outright: centuries of aristocratic prestige. It became known as one of history's most extraordinary social exchanges. American money for British titles. Historians would later nickname many of these wealthy American brides dollar princesses. Some marriages were entered willingly. Others were driven by relentless family pressure. For Alva Vanderbilt, the equation was obvious. A Vanderbilt daughter married to an English duke would permanently transform the family's place in history. The Aestheres could claim old American lineage. The Vanderbilts would possess something even greater: European nobility. It wasn't simply marriage anymore. It was strategy. It was branding. It was legacy. And Alva believed no sacrifice was too great, even if that sacrifice was her own child. Across the Atlantic lived Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. His family occupied one of England's grandest estates, Blenheim Palace. Its halls stretched endlessly, Its history reached back centuries. Its name carried immense prestige. But behind those magnificent walls, money was disappearing. Maintaining a palace of that size was enormously expensive. Repairs mounted. Income declined. Old aristocratic privilege no longer guaranteed financial security. The Duke needed wealth. The Vanderbilts needed status. On paper, the arrangement seemed almost perfect. To outsiders, it looked romantic. To those negotiating behind closed doors, it resembled a business contract. The Duke would gain one of the largest fortunes in America through Consuelo's dowry. The Vanderbilts would gain one of Britain's most distinguished titles. Everyone appeared to win. Everyone, except the bride. Historians continue to debate the Duke's personal feelings. He was not portrayed by contemporaries as a monster, nor was he known as a passionate romantic. Many accounts suggest he viewed the marriage as a practical necessity, an obligation to preserve his family's future. Consuelo was expected to do exactly the same, except she couldn't, because every time the Duke's name appeared, she saw someone else's face. Winthrop, the man she truly loved. As preparations accelerated, Consuelo begged her mother to stop. She pleaded. She cried. She insisted she could never love the Duke. Alva refused to listen. Love was temporary. Status was forever. According to Consuelo's later memoirs, the emotional pressure became overwhelming. Accounts from Consuelo herself describe being subjected to relentless coercion before the wedding. She recalled being isolated and pressured until resistance seemed impossible. One of the most enduring stories surrounding the marriage is that she was effectively confined in her room while her mother demanded compliance. A story rooted in Consuelo's own recollections, though some details have been debated by historians. Whether every detail unfolded exactly as later remembered, the larger truth remains undisputed. Consuelo did not freely want this marriage. She repeatedly tried to escape it. She repeatedly begged not to go through with it. She cried so intensely that doctors reportedly feared for her health. Friends attempted to comfort her. Some relatives quietly questioned Alva's determination. It changed nothing, because in Alva's mind, this wasn't cruelty. It was necessary leadership. She believed children existed to strengthen the family. Personal happiness was secondary. Duty came first. Legacy came first. Victory came first. Her daughter would understand one day, or so she believed. Finally, the resistance ended, not because Consuelo had changed her mind, because she had run out of strength. She agreed. The wedding would proceed, but the smile the world would soon admire would hide a heart already broken. On November 6, 1895, New York stopped. Thousands gathered outside St. Thomas Church. Society's elite filled the pews. Reporters packed every available space. Artists sketched the guests as they arrived. Across America, newspapers described the event as the wedding of the century. It had everything: unimaginable wealth, ancient nobility, a Vanderbilt heiress, a British duke. It looked less like a marriage, and more like two empires signing a treaty. Then, the bride arrived. Consuelo Vanderbilt wore a breathtaking ivory satin gown. Layers of lace flowed behind her. Diamonds sparkled beneath the church lights. To the crowd, she appeared radiant, calm, almost regal. But appearances can be the greatest lies history ever tells. According to Consuelo's own memoirs, she entered the church after days of profound emotional distress. She later wrote that she had cried so much before the ceremony that her eyes remained swollen. Imagine standing before hundreds of guests, knowing every eye in the room envied your life, while all you could think about was the life you were losing. As she walked toward the altar, she wasn't walking toward love. She was walking away from it. Every step echoed like the closing of a prison gate. The ceremony itself unfolded with flawless precision. Vows were exchanged. Hands were joined. Smiles were photographed. Applause filled the church. The newspapers declared it a triumph. History remembered it as glamorous. Only the bride understood. It felt like a funeral. Soon after the wedding, Consuelo left America. She crossed the Atlantic. Ahead of her stood Blenheim Palace, one of the grandest residences in Britain. More than 300 rooms, miles of landscaped gardens, magnificent paintings, ancient tapestries, everything a duchess could ever want. Except peace, because enormous buildings can still feel painfully lonely. Behind palace walls, reality quickly replaced fantasy. The Duke and Duchess had fundamentally different personalities. Charles Spencer Churchill valued duty, order, and tradition. Consuelo longed for warmth, affection, and emotional connection. They fulfilled their public obligations, hosted guests, attended ceremonies, produced heirs. To outsiders, the marriage appeared successful. Inside, distance grew. The palace echoed with silence. Not the peaceful silence of contentment. The heavy silence of strangers. Consuelo later described herself as profoundly unhappy during much of the marriage. Yet, she endured. Because that was what society expected. Especially from women. Divorce carried enormous stigma. Duty mattered more than desire. Reputation outweighed happiness. For years, she played the role history had assigned her, even when it slowly broke her heart. From a business perspective, the merger succeeded. The Duke received the financial support that helped stabilize parts of the Marlborough estate. The Vanderbilt name became forever linked with one of Britain's most distinguished noble houses. Alva achieved the social victory she had spent years pursuing. On paper, everyone won. But history isn't written only on paper. It's written in people. The marriage gradually unraveled. Emotional distance became impossible to ignore. Years passed. Separate lives quietly emerged beneath the polished surface. Eventually, the relationship collapsed. Consuelo and the Duke formally separated in the early 20th century, and their marriage was later annulled by the Catholic Church after they had both moved on with their lives. The arrangement that had seemed so perfect to ambitious parents could not manufacture love. Because wealth can purchase castles, it cannot purchase affection. Titles can command respect. They cannot command the human heart. Time has a peculiar way of confronting us with our own decisions. Years after forcing the marriage, Alva herself underwent a profound transformation. Her own marriage to William K. Vanderbilt had ended in divorce, a scandal in its own right during that era. The woman who had once preached duty above all else had walked away from her own unhappy marriage. It was an irony impossible to ignore. Even more striking, later in life, Alva reportedly acknowledged that compelling Consuelo into the marriage had been a grave mistake. For Consuelo, those words came painfully late. An apology cannot return lost years. It cannot restore a first love. It cannot erase memories of tears shed behind locked doors. Still, mother and daughter eventually reconciled, not because the past disappeared, but because carrying bitterness forever becomes its own prison. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Sometimes, it is simply choosing to stop letting yesterday dictate tomorrow. Yet history remembers both women very differently. One, as an ambitious architect of social conquest. The other, as the young woman whose happiness became collateral damage. And perhaps that is the cruelest irony of all. Alva spent years chasing acceptance from society, but the story that survived was not her triumph. It was her daughter's sacrifice. History has a strange habit. Sometimes, it gives people exactly what they were denied. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. For Consuelo Vanderbilt, freedom arrived years after the wedding that had captivated the world. By then, she had fulfilled every obligation society demanded of her. She had borne children. She had represented one of Britain's greatest noble families. She had smiled for photographers, hosted royalty, performed the role written for her before she was old enough to write her own story. And finally, she walked away. Her marriage to the Duke came to an end. Years later, after it was annulled by the Catholic Church, Consuelo married French aviator and businessman Jacques Balsan, a man she genuinely loved. For the first time, marriage wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't an investment. It wasn't a diplomatic alliance. It was simply her choice. Those who knew her later in life often remarked on the difference. The sadness that had once defined her public image slowly faded. She devoted herself to philanthropy, supported hospitals, worked with charitable causes, dedicated herself to helping others rather than maintaining appearances. Perhaps, after spending years as someone else's investment, she finally became the author of her own life. The Vanderbilt fortune reshaped America. Their railroads connected cities. Their investments fueled industry. Their mansions became architectural masterpieces. But today, when people remember the family, they don't remember balance sheets. They remember stories. Stories of unimaginable wealth, family rivalries, extravagance, broken relationships, and one young woman who was treated less like a daughter and more like a bargaining chip. Because fortunes don't merely reveal character. Sometimes, they distort it. Power has a dangerous habit. It convinces people that everything has a price. Land, politics, friendship, marriage, even love. Eventually, the line between building a legacy and owning another human being can become frighteningly thin. Alva Vanderbilt never saw herself as a villain. That is what makes history so unsettling. History's darkest figures rarely wake up believing they are evil. They believe they are practical, necessary, visionary. They tell themselves, this is for the family. This is for the future. This sacrifice will make sense one day. Sometimes, they are simply too blinded by ambition to recognize the humanity standing in front of them. There is an old belief that every family builds its fortune on sacrifice. The Vanderbilts certainly did. They conquered industries, built railroads, raised palaces that still astonish visitors today. But hidden behind the marble was another kind of construction. A mother building her family's future with her daughter's happiness. History often celebrates the people who won. The wealthiest, the most powerful, the most influential. But here, on the darker page, we're interested in a different question. Who paid the bill? Because every empire sends someone the invoice. Sometimes, it's a rival. Sometimes, it's an entire nation. And sometimes, it's a 17-year-old girl, standing at an altar, trying not to cry. Money bought the Vanderbilts' mansions. It bought masterpieces. It bought influence. It even bought a royal title. But it could never buy back the years Consuelo lost. Perhaps that's the cruelest lesson of all. The things we value most become the things we are most willing to sacrifice. Status, power, legacy. Until one day, we wake up surrounded by everything we ever wanted and discover we've traded away everything that truly mattered. So tonight, as we close another darker page of history, ask yourself this. If love, family, and loyalty can all be turned into currency, what, exactly, is left that money can't buy?